Clara had always believed that life was a series of small, quiet battles, ones that you fought every day without anyone really noticing. She woke up before the sun, her small apartment still dark and the air heavy with the smell of old wood and the faint hint of coffee from the night before. Her son, no older than 7, was already awake, rubbing his eyes and shuffling into the tiny kitchen where she was brewing a simple breakfast. The two of them didn't have much, but Clara made sure they had what mattered: warmth, care, and a home filled with music. She moved around the apartment with practiced ease, preparing breakfast while keeping an eye on her son, making sure he had enough to eat before school. It wasn't much, just toast and some fruit, but it was honest and she hoped it would give him enough energy to start his day. Clara often wondered how she had ended up here, alone and struggling, yet somehow managing to keep her head above water. She had dreams once, big ones, of playing on grand stages and sharing her music with thousands. But life had other plans. Life had handed her responsibilities and little time for the kind of ambitions she once nurtured. By the time they left for the small community center where Clara taught piano lessons, the streets were already bustling with people hurrying to work, school, or errands. Clara's bag was slung over her shoulder, worn but sturdy, carrying sheet music, notebooks, and a few personal items she kept with her always. Her son walked beside her, backpack bouncing lightly with each step, chatting about small things, the way children do, blissfully unaware of the weight their parents carry. The community center was not grand. It was a modest building with faded paint and a few cracks running along the walls, but it had a heart, and Clara loved it for that. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and old books, and the faint sound of a piano from another room always greeted her, as if the building itself was alive with music. She liked that. It reminded her that beauty could exist in unexpected places, even when life was difficult. Clara's first class was routine, filled with children who stumbled over notes and rhythms, their little hands pressing the keys with a mixture of curiosity and clumsiness. She guided them gently, her voice calm and encouraging, never harsh even when mistakes were made. Music, she believed, was not about perfection but about expression, about feeling something deeply and sharing it, even if only with oneself. The children left smiling, their small triumphs visible in their bright eyes, and Clara felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing she had made a difference, however small. It was during a break between lessons that the staff called her into the main office. A troubled girl had arrived, someone who needed special attention. Clara didn't know much about her, only that she had been through something difficult and was refusing to speak to anyone. The staff suggested that maybe music could reach her in a way words could not. Clara agreed without hesitation, feeling a mixture of curiosity and concern. She had helped children before, some more challenging than others, but there was something about the description that made her heart tighten. She found the girl sitting alone in the corner of a quiet room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes fixed on the floor. There was an air of tension, a sadness so deep that it seemed to weigh down the very atmosphere around her. Clara approached slowly, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor, trying not to startle her. She smiled gently, sitting down on the small bench beside the piano. The girl did not look up, did not respond, and Clara felt the familiar pang of worry that often accompanied her work with children in distress. Clara placed her fingers lightly on the keys, testing the sound, feeling the familiar texture of the worn wood beneath her touch. She began to play softly, a simple, calming melody, letting the music fill the room. She played slowly at first, careful not to overwhelm the girl, letting each note settle and breathe. The girl flinched at first, but as the melody continued, something began to shift. Her posture relaxed slightly, her arms uncurling, if only a little, as if the music was pulling her out of the darkness. Clara didn't speak. She didn't need to. Music, she knew, could say what words often could not. She let her hands move across the keys, guiding the girl gently with the flow of sound, hoping to offer a small sense of safety. She imagined the girl's heart, fragile and raw, and tried to reach it with every note. The room was quiet except for the piano, and Clara felt a connection, subtle but real, forming between them. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time seemed to blur in the gentle embrace of music. The girl's breathing slowed, her body easing, and finally she looked up. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was something else there too. Curiosity, a glimmer of trust, the faintest hint of hope. Clara continued to play, smiling softly at the progress, knowing it was small steps that mattered. She had learned over the years that patience was as important as talent, that even a single note of understanding could begin to heal. The bell signaling the next class went off, but Clara didn't stop immediately. She continued to play, letting the music flow, hoping the girl would feel that she was not alone. Slowly, the girl moved closer to the piano, her fingers brushing against the keys as if testing them, unsure but drawn by the sound. Clara encouraged her with a nod, a gentle smile, letting her know it was okay to explore, to make mistakes, to simply be in the moment. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, casting warm light through the windows, catching the dust particles in the air and making them glow like tiny stars. It was a mundane detail, but Clara noticed it, appreciating the beauty in the ordinary as she always did. Music had a way of doing that, making the simplest things seem extraordinary, giving weight to moments that might otherwise pass unnoticed. She glanced at the girl again and saw the first real sign of engagement. The girl's hands were on the keys now, tentative but deliberate, pressing notes and discovering the sounds for herself. Clara guided her gently, offering encouragement without pressure, letting the girl find her own rhythm. It was a breakthrough, small but significant, and Clara felt her heart lift with quiet pride. Teaching had always been more than a job for Clara. It was a calling, a way to connect, to offer solace and hope to those who needed it most. She knew the world could be harsh, and children often carried burdens they could not express. Music, she believed, could be a bridge, a lifeline, a way to say you are not alone. Today, as she watched the girl begin to respond, she felt the truth of that belief more strongly than ever. The community center was busy with the sound of footsteps and distant voices, but in that small room there was a bubble of calm, a space where the girl could begin to feel safe. Clara didn't rush her. She had learned that trust could not be forced. It had to be earned, note by note, moment by moment. She continued to play, letting the music weave around them, carrying a sense of hope that words alone could never provide. Clara's own life was far from perfect. Bills piled up, her job barely covered expenses, and the weight of responsibility never seemed to ease. Yet in these moments when she could help a child feel understood, she felt a sense of purpose that made the struggles worthwhile. She was reminded that even in hardship there was beauty, there was connection, there was the chance to make a difference. However small, the girl finally smiled, faintly but genuinely, and Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it was enough to keep going, to keep believing in the power of compassion, patience, and music. She didn't know what challenges the day would bring next, nor did she know the surprising turn that life had in store for her. But at that moment, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. As the girl began to explore the piano more confidently, Clara realized that sometimes the most meaningful moments were the ones that went unnoticed by the wider world. Today she had done something important, something that mattered deeply, even if only to one child, and that, she decided, was enough to face whatever else the day might bring. After the first few minutes of playing, Clara noticed the girl's attention slowly sharpening. The melody she had chosen was gentle, almost hesitant at first, but as it continued, it seemed to weave a quiet spell over the room. The girl's fingers twitched, her eyes flicking toward the keys as if drawn by an invisible thread that Clara didn't need to explain. Clara kept her movements soft, letting each note land carefully, giving space for the girl to respond at her own pace. She understood that trust was earned in silence as much as in words. The room was small, with the pale light of the afternoon sun slipping in through dusty windows, creating warm pools on the floor. Clara glanced at the sheet music in front of her, but she barely needed it now. Her hands moved freely, guided by instinct and memory, letting her emotions shape the flow of each note. Music had always been her refuge, her way of communicating what she could not say aloud, and now it became a bridge to this silent, wounded child. For a long while, the girl said nothing. She did not move closer, she did not speak, and Clara played on, letting the music itself fill the spaces that words could not. She imagined the girl's world, how it must have felt to carry so much pain and confusion at such a young age. Clara's heart ached, not just for the girl, but for all the children who had to face burdens they did not understand and could not share. Her fingers danced across the keys, shaping the music into something comforting, something that said, even without words, "You are safe here." You are not alone. A soft note drifted into the air, lingering, and the girl's posture seemed to change just a fraction. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing slowed, and Clara felt a small thrill of hope. She continued, adjusting the tempo gently, letting the music rise and fall like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. It was not about impressing anyone. It was about connection, and every note carried an unspoken promise of care. Clara's own worries melted away for a few moments as she became completely immersed in the music. Bill's work, the endless balancing of responsibilities, they all faded. In the presence of the girl's tentative attention, only the sound of the piano existed. The keys felt alive beneath her fingers, each one holding the power to reach someone's heart. Clara had learned that the hardest battles were often fought in silence, and music was one of the few weapons that could fight for hope without anger or force. Minutes passed slowly. The girl, still silent, finally allowed her gaze to wander toward the piano. Her eyes were cautious, curious, searching for something she could not name. Clara offered a small, encouraging smile without breaking her flow, letting the music guide her like a gentle hand. She sensed the shift, tiny but significant, and she played on, letting each note become an invitation, a soft bridge across the chasm of fear and isolation. Eventually, the girl moved a little closer. Her small fingers brushed the keys, tentative at first, pressing one or two notes with a delicate touch. Clara nodded slightly, keeping her hands in motion but giving room for the girl to explore. The smile that appeared was tiny, almost hesitant, but it was there. Clara felt a spark of relief and pride. Even a small gesture, she knew, could open doors that words alone could not. Time seemed to stretch, the rest of the community center fading into the background. Clara had taught many children, but there was something about this girl, something fragile yet fiercely present, that required every ounce of her patience and focus. She altered the melody slightly, letting it become simpler, more playful, hoping to invite the girl to join in. Slowly, as if testing the waters, the girl's hands moved across the keys in unison with Clara's, creating soft, tentative harmonies. A quiet joy began to fill the room. The girl's expression softened, her lips twitching into a small smile. Clara could feel the transformation, the breaking down of invisible walls that had held the girl captive in her own fear. She played with a lightness that made the notes feel warm and inviting, encouraging the girl to explore her own curiosity, her own creativity. Music, Clara realized, was teaching the girl how to trust, how to feel again, and how to speak without words. Clara's eyes were on the girl, watching her carefully, noticing every small movement, every shift in expression. The girl pressed a key harder this time, causing a louder note to sound, and then she paused, uncertain. Clara smiled gently, nodding as if to say, "Yes, that's perfect." The girl tried again, this time pressing more confidently, and Clara felt a surge of pride. She knew this was more than just learning a tune. It was a reclaiming of courage and a tentative step toward healing. The minutes turned into half an hour. Clara's voice remained silent, but the music spoke volumes. She felt a deep connection forming, a delicate bond built through shared rhythm and harmony. The girl's breathing was steadier now, her small body relaxing, her hands finding the keys with growing confidence. Clara marveled at the resilience of children, how even in the face of difficulty, they could respond to kindness and patience. If only someone showed them the way. At one point, the girl stopped playing, her small hands hovering above the keys, unsure. Clara simply continued her melody, soft and unwavering, giving the girl the space to return when she was ready. Slowly, the girl pressed a few more notes, matching the rhythm, and Clara felt the subtle energy of trust taking root. The girl's eyes met hers briefly, and in that silent exchange, Clara sensed a fragile understanding, a mutual recognition of shared courage. It was not perfect, and Clara did not expect it to be. She knew that real change happened in small increments, in moments of quiet bravery that no one else might see. She played with warmth, allowing mistakes and uncertainty to exist as part of the process, letting the girl understand that it was okay to be imperfect, to try, to stumble, and to rise again. Music, she believed, was a mirror for life itself, gentle, forgiving, and capable of revealing strength hidden within vulnerability. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden beams across the room. Clara didn't notice the time. She was entirely absorbed in the unfolding connection, in the small miracles happening before her eyes. The girl's progress was slow, subtle yet undeniable. Each note she played was a step forward, a sign that the walls around her heart were beginning to crack. The trust and hope were finding a way in. Clara's mind wandered briefly to her own son, imagining how he would react if he could see this transformation. She thought about the power of kindness, patience, and attention, and how such small gestures could leave lasting imprints on a young soul. She knew the world could be harsh and unforgiving, but she also knew that moments like this made it worthwhile, that a single act of care could ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. The girl began to move more freely now, her fingers finding patterns on the keys without hesitation. She smiled more openly, and Clara felt a warm satisfaction, a quiet triumph that was deeply personal and profoundly human. She didn't need applause or recognition. The change she was witnessing was reward enough. Music had become a language of comfort, of reassurance, and Clara was humbled to be its messenger. As the session drew to a close, Clara slowed her playing, letting the notes fade gently into silence. The girl sat still for a moment, absorbing the quiet, and then gave a small, shy nod of acknowledgement. It was not words, but it was enough. It was enough to show that a bond had been formed, that the girl felt seen, heard, and safe. Clara smiled softly, letting her hands rest on the keys, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The girl rose slowly, her steps tentative but steady, and approached Clara. She whispered a simple "thank you," barely audible yet carrying weight far beyond its size. Clara reached out, offering a gentle pat on the shoulder, and the girl's brief contact seemed to speak volumes. In that small moment, the room felt transformed, filled with an invisible light born from courage, understanding, and the quiet power of music. Clara gathered her belongings, packing sheet music and notebooks with careful hands. She glanced at the girl one last time before leaving, seeing a spark of life and curiosity in her eyes that had not been there before. The world outside awaited with its struggles and responsibilities, but in that room, a small miracle had occurred, and Clara carried it with her as she moved on to the rest of her day. She felt a quiet hope, not just for the girl but for herself, knowing that even in the midst of life's difficulties, she could make a difference, note by note, heart to heart. Clara didn't realize that someone had been watching from outside the room. The music she played had drifted through the open window, catching the attention of a man standing nearby. He had paused, at first only curious about the sound, but soon found himself drawn in. The melody was soft but powerful, filled with emotion that words could not carry. It was not the kind of polished performance one heard at grand concerts. It was raw, real, and deeply human. The man stood still, his hand resting on the doorframe, his eyes fixed on the scene inside. From where he stood, he could see the little girl at the piano, her small hands touching the keys with a mixture of fear and wonder, and beside her sat Clara, patient and calm. He recognized the girl instantly. It was his daughter, the one he had been searching for emotionally but failing to reach for weeks. A sudden ache spread through his chest as he watched. He had seen her cry. He had seen her retreat into silence, and no amount of comfort, gifts, or professional help had seemed to reach her. But here she was, responding to a stranger's music, as if she had finally found a language she understood. He was not an ordinary man. He was known by many, respected in the business world, and often written about in magazines. To most people, he was a symbol of success and ambition, a billionaire who had built an empire from the ground up. But in this moment, he felt none of that mattered. The titles, the wealth, the admiration, all of it faded as he watched his daughter slowly come alive again under the touch of this humble woman's music. He stayed where he was, quietly observing, not wanting to interrupt something that felt sacred. Inside the room, Clara continued playing, unaware of her audience. Her focus was entirely on the girl, whose expression was softening with every passing note. There was a rhythm forming between them, a silent understanding that transcended the need for speech. Clara didn't think about who might be listening or watching. She simply played from her heart, allowing her feelings to pour through the piano. She had always believed that the purest form of communication came from honesty, and music was her most honest voice. The man's thoughts were heavy. He thought about the times he had missed, birthdays, school plays, quiet dinners, because of endless meetings and business trips. He had justified it to him. self-telling his daughter and others that it was all for her, for their future. But now, watching her respond to the music of a stranger, he realized how distant he had become. The look on her face now, the faint smile and peacefulness, was something he hadn't seen in far too long. Clara shifted slightly on the bench, her fingers moving into a slower, more emotional tune. The melody was tender, almost sorrowful, yet full of warmth. It told a story without words, a story of struggle, loss, and small victories. She felt the weight of her own life in it. The long nights spent worrying about rent, the endless effort to give her son a good life, the quiet loneliness she never spoke of. Somehow all those feelings poured into her music, and maybe that was why it reached others so deeply. It wasn't just sound, it was truth. The man outside could feel it too. Each note seemed to pull at something deep within him, something he had buried under years of work and responsibility. He felt tears sting his eyes but didn't move to wipe them away. It had been a long time since he had felt this kind of emotion. Watching the girl and the pianist together, he saw not just music but healing, the kind that money could never buy. Inside, Clara finally slowed her playing. The girl had started pressing the keys alongside her again, this time more confidently. The melody had become a shared creation now, two souls speaking through sound. The girl even laughed softly at one point, a small, genuine laugh that filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with quiet joy. She didn't know why this particular child's reaction touched her so deeply, but it did. There was something special here, something that felt bigger than a single lesson. The man decided to step inside. His footsteps were almost silent, but Clara noticed the shift in air behind her. She turned slightly, surprised to see a tall figure standing at the doorway. The girl's eyes widened in shock, her small hands freezing mid-note. Clara immediately sensed the bond between them. It was the way the girl looked at him, a mixture of love, longing, and fear. Clara stood up quickly, not sure if she had overstepped by continuing the lesson. "I'm sorry," she began softly. "I didn't mean to." The man raised a hand, gently stopping her. "Please," he said quietly. "Don't apologize. I should be the one thanking you." His voice was low but filled with emotion. Clara could see now that he was dressed in an elegant suit, the kind of clothing that spoke of wealth and influence. His presence carried quiet authority, but there was something humble in his tone that made her pause. She didn't recognize him, not yet, but she felt the sincerity in his words. The girl turned to her father slowly, her eyes uncertain. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You were playing," he said gently. "That's the first time I've heard you touch a piano in weeks." His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, revealing the depth of his feelings. The girl nodded shyly, her fingers still resting on the keys. "She helped me," she whispered, glancing at Clara. The man turned his gaze to Clara, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You have no idea what this means," he said. "She hasn't spoken to anyone, not even to me. I've tried everything, doctors, therapists, nothing reached her. But this," he gestured toward the piano. "This did." Clara didn't know what to say. She was used to helping children open up through music. But this moment felt different. There was something powerful in the way the man spoke, in the way his voice cracked slightly as he thanked her. She felt a rush of warmth and humility. "I'm just glad she found some peace," she said softly. "Music has a way of doing that." He nodded slowly, still looking at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It's more than peace," he said quietly. "It's hope." The room fell silent for a few seconds, filled only by the faint hum of the piano strings. Clara looked at the girl again and saw the faintest sparkle of life returning to her eyes. It was the kind of change that could not be forced or faked. It came from something genuine. She felt honored to have been part of it. The man stood up and offered his hand to Clara. "I'm grateful," he said. "You've given my daughter something no one else could. Please allow me to do something in return." Clara shook her head politely, her instinctive humility showing. "That's not necessary," she said quickly. "Seeing her smile again is enough." He smiled slightly, though there was sadness in it. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Someone who believed in kindness more than reward." His words carried a tone of respect, and for a moment Clara saw not a billionaire, but a father, worried, tired, and deeply human. The girl hugged her father tightly, and he held her for a long moment, closing his eyes as if to keep the memory alive. Clara turned away slightly, giving them privacy, her heart swelling with quiet emotion. She had witnessed many small miracles in her work, but this one felt special. She didn't know who the man was or what his life looked like beyond this moment, but she could sense the depth of what had just happened. When they finally stepped out of the room together, the girl waved shyly at Clara. "Will you play again tomorrow?" she asked softly. Clara smiled warmly. "Of course," she said. "We'll play whatever your heart feels." The man placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder and nodded in gratitude before they left. Clara watched them go, still unaware that she had just changed the life of one of the wealthiest men in the city. To her it was just another day, another connection made through the piano, but to him it was something far greater. As Clara packed up her things, the faint evening light filled the room. She sat for a moment longer at the piano, pressing a single note and letting it echo softly. She thought about the girl's laughter, the father's tears, and how music could bridge gaps that seemed impossible to cross. It was in moments like this that she felt her purpose most deeply, not in fame, not in recognition, but in the quiet human act of reaching someone's heart when they needed it most. Outside, the man helped his daughter into his car, still thinking about what he had just witnessed. The sound of Clara's music lingered in his mind, a melody that refused to fade. For the first time in a long while, he felt something inside him shift. A reminder that no amount of success could replace simple compassion. He looked at his daughter, who was gazing out the window with a faint smile, and he knew he had found a reason to change. That night, Clara walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights. Her son ran up to her when she entered the small apartment, and she hugged him tightly, feeling grateful for everything she had. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to take a turn she never expected. Somewhere in the city, a billionaire was thinking about her kindness, and about how a simple melody had brought light back into his daughter's world. The next morning came with a soft drizzle outside, the kind that made everything quiet and thoughtful. The little girl woke up feeling a bit lighter after the music from the night before. But her mother sat at the kitchen table with a distant look. She kept thinking about the man who had been sitting quietly in the corner, the one who had watched everything unfold. She didn't know who he was, but there had been something powerful in his silence, something curious. At the small diner where she worked, things felt different that day. The usual laughter and chatter were still there, but people kept looking at her with new eyes. Some even smiled kindly, which was rare. A few mentioned that they had heard about her piano playing from the night before. She tried to shrug it off modestly, but deep inside she couldn't help feeling a tiny spark of pride. That moment, that song had meant something to someone. As she cleared a table, an older woman in a fine coat walked in. She had a polite smile, but carried an air of importance. The waitress greeted her warmly and showed her to a seat. A few minutes later, the woman spoke softly. "I was at the hotel last night. I heard you play." The waitress froze for a second, unsure what to say. "Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it, ma'am. It was just something to calm the little one." The woman shook her head gently. "It was more than that. You have a gift, dear. Not just for music, but for touching people." She handed over a small card. "Someone might want to meet you." The waitress glanced at the card and her breath caught. It had the name of one of the city's biggest music foundations printed on it. She didn't understand what this could mean, but before she could ask, the woman smiled kindly and said, "He'll be in touch." That night, back home, she held the card like it was made of gold. Her daughter sat beside her asking questions. "Mama, what does it say?" She smiled softly. "It says, maybe someone heard us. Maybe something good might happen." Days went by. Life went on as usual, though a new sense of quiet hope lingered in the air. Then one afternoon, a black car stopped in front of the diner. It wasn't something anyone saw often there. A tall man stepped out, the same man who had watched her play that night. He walked inside, looking calm but serious. Everyone turned to stare. The waitress nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Her heart began to race. When their eyes met, he smiled faintly and said, "I think we've met before." She nodded, unsure what to say. "You were there that night." "I was," he said, "and I haven't stopped thinking about it since." He paused before continuing. "May I talk to you for a moment?" Her manager, noticing the man's sharp suit and quiet authority, quickly nodded and told her to take a short break. They stepped outside, where the drizzle had started. Again. The man looked out at the wet streets for a moment before turning to her. "I'm sorry if this seems sudden, But that night your music, it wasn't something ordinary. You helped a child in crisis without even thinking twice. And the way you played, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten a long time ago. She blinked, surprised by his tone. I just wanted to calm her down. That's all, he smiled faintly. That's exactly what makes it remarkable. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You just felt something and gave it to others. That's what true art is. There was a long silence before he spoke again. I run a foundation that supports music education for underprivileged children. And I'd like you to be part of it. Her mouth fell open slightly. Me? He nodded. Yes, I don't offer this often. But you have something real, something rare. I want you to play again, this time for a purpose. The woman's eyes filled with disbelief. I don't have training, sir. Don't say just, he interrupted gently. You're not just anything. You're someone who understands what music means. That's enough. She stood there speechless, her heart pounding. The drizzle turned into soft rain and she could feel her hands trembling. I don't even know what to say. Say yes, he said simply. We'll handle the rest. She took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. Yes, the man smiled. Good. My assistant will contact you tomorrow. We'll arrange for you to visit our center. He handed her his card and left as quietly as he had come. That night she sat by the window, watching the rain fall. Her daughter was asleep on the couch holding her toy piano. The mother's heart was full, part fear, part wonder. Could this really be happening? Could something so simple, one song played from the heart, change their lives? The next day she visited the music center. It was a beautiful old building, filled with the sound of children learning instruments. The man was already there waiting for her. I wanted you to see this, he said. Every one of these children comes from a story like yours. We're giving them something to believe in. As she looked around, her eyes began to glisten. The children smiled as they practiced, some shyly glancing at her. She saw herself in them, the same struggle, the same quiet hope. He led her into a small hall with a grand piano. This is where we hold our gatherings. Would you like to play something? He asked. She hesitated. Her hands shook slightly, but then she remembered that night. The frightened girl, the melody that came from nowhere, the peace that followed. Slowly, she sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang out, soft and uncertain. Then another. Soon the music began to flow, filling the hall with warmth and emotion. It was raw, imperfect, and deeply human. The man closed his eyes, listening, and a small smile touched his lips. When she finished, there was silence. The children who had gathered near the door clapped softly. She turned around, her cheeks wet with tears. I didn't know I still had this inside me, she whispered. The man stepped closer. You never lost it. Life just made you forget for a while. They stood there for a moment, not saying much. But something unspoken passed between them. Respect, understanding, and maybe a sense of destiny. In the days that followed, she began to visit the center regularly. She helped the children learn simple tunes, shared stories, and even played small performances. Each day she grew more confident, more alive. Her daughter loved coming too. She would sit near the piano watching her mother with wide, admiring eyes. One evening, after a long session, the man approached her again. You've changed this place, he said quietly. You've given everyone something real to hold on to. She smiled modestly. I think they've given me more. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, You don't know how much this means to me personally. That night I wasn't just a man in the corner. I was a father. That little girl you comforted, she's my daughter. The words hit her like a wave. She gasped softly. Your daughter? He nodded slowly. Yes, I didn't want to tell you before because I wanted to see who you truly were. And you showed me. You reminded me what kindness and art can do when they come from the heart. Her eyes filled with emotion. I didn't know. I just wanted to help her. He smiled warmly. And you did. More than you'll ever know. For a moment they stood quietly, both feeling the weight of the truth. The rain began again outside, tapping softly against the windows. It was as if the world itself was applauding their story. That night, as she walked home with her daughter, the city lights reflected on the wet streets, shimmering like dreams. She held her little girl's hand tightly, feeling something new inside her, a sense of purpose, of hope, and maybe finally, peace. Weeks passed, and the air at the music center grew warmer with laughter and melody. Every corner echoed with children's laughter and the sound of pianos, violins, and flutes blending together. The once shy waitress, now known simply as the woman who played from the heart, had become a quiet inspiration to everyone around her. She no longer wore the worry on her face that had once followed her everywhere. Her eyes had light in them now, a light that came from seeing something change, not just in her life but in others. One morning she arrived early at the center, as she often did. She loved those quiet moments before the children arrived. The grand piano stood waiting, polished and proud. She ran her fingers gently across the keys, not to play yet, but just to feel their smooth coolness. It reminded her how far she had come, from playing in the small corner of a diner for tips, to standing in a place filled with music, hope, and new beginnings. The door opened softly, and the man entered. He looked different now, less like the distant, powerful figure she had first met, and more like someone grounded, someone who had remembered what mattered. He smiled when he saw her. "You're early again," he said. She smiled back. "I like the quiet before the music starts." He nodded. "I used to too, but lately I find that I prefer the sound of life happening around me." They both laughed softly. It was a comfortable kind of silence that followed, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. Then he looked around the hall and said, "There's something I want to tell you." She turned, curious. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "We're organizing a concert next week. It's a charity event. All proceeds will go to expanding the center. I want you to play the opening piece." Her hands froze on the keys. "Me?" she whispered. "Yes, you," he said simply. "You'll be playing in front of guests, partners, donors, and musicians from all over. It's time people saw what real music looks like. Not perfection, but honesty." Her heart began to race. "I don't know if I can do that. I've never played in front of that many people before. What if I make mistakes?" He smiled gently. "Then you make mistakes. But you'll still play beautifully because it'll come from the same place it always has. Your heart." She took a deep breath. Something in his calm confidence gave her courage. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll do it." The rest of the week was a blur of preparation. She spent hours practicing after the children left. Some nights her daughter sat near her, sketching quietly while her mother played. Every note she played told a story, of struggle, of love, of second chances. And each time she reached the final chord, she smiled softly, realizing how music had carried her through everything. The day of the concert came faster than she expected. The center was glowing with lights and filled with people dressed elegantly. There were photographers, journalists, and guests who whispered excitedly about the event. She stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly, looking at her reflection in the mirror. She wore a simple, elegant dress that the staff had helped her pick. Nothing fancy, but it made her feel like herself. Her daughter peeked in, holding a small flower. "Mama, you're going to do great," she said with a big grin. The woman smiled and hugged her tightly. "Thank you, my little one." When it was time, she walked onto the stage. The crowd quieted, waiting. The grand piano sat under the soft glow of the spotlight. She sat down, took a deep breath, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Then she began to play. The first notes floated through the hall, gentle and pure. The melody grew, flowing like a story being told without words. Each key spoke of her journey, the pain, the loneliness, the love, and the hope that had carried her here. The audience sat still, mesmerized. Even those who came expecting perfection found themselves feeling something deeper. The man stood at the side of the hall, watching her. But this time, he wasn't watching as a businessman or a father. He was watching as someone humbled by the beauty of sincerity. His daughter sat next to him, her eyes bright and her small hands clasped together, as if she were afraid to breathe too loudly. When the final note faded, the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Then slowly the applause began. It grew louder and louder until it filled the entire hall. The woman stood trembling, her eyes wet with emotion. She bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed by the sea of faces smiling up at her. The man stepped onto the stage and joined her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the crowd, "this woman reminded all of us, that music isn't about fame or perfection. It's about heart. It's about the courage to share your truth through sound. Tonight, she gave us that gift." The crowd applauded again, some standing to their feet. She tried to speak, but could barely find her voice. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for listening. After the concert, people came up to her, shaking her hand, thanking her for the performance. A few parents even asked if she could teach their children. She smiled, humbled and touched by the attention. But the best moment came when the man's daughter walked up and handed her a small card. In crayon, the little girl had written, "Thank you for helping me smile again." Tears filled the woman's eyes as she hugged the child gently. "You helped me too," she whispered. Later that evening, as the guests began to leave, the man found her sitting quietly near the piano. He sat beside her. "You did it," he said softly. She smiled. "I can't believe it's real." He looked at her thoughtfully. "It's more real than anything. You gave people something to feel tonight. That's rare." She turned to him, her expression gentle but curious. "Why did you really choose me? You could have hired anyone." He leaned back slightly. "Because money can find talent. But heart dirt, that's something you can't buy. You had it from the start." They sat there for a moment, both quiet, listening to the last few echoes of the evening. Then he said, "The foundation board wants to offer you a full-time position, not just as a teacher, but as our music coordinator. You'd help run the programs, train others, and bring more children into the world of music." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Me? Are you serious?" He smiled. "You've already changed lives without trying. Imagine what you could do if you had the chance." Her hands shook slightly as she nodded. Yes, I'll do it." In the following months, everything began to change. She moved her daughter into a better home near the center. She worked closely with the staff, designing new music workshops and organizing community concerts. Her story spread quietly through the city, the single mother whose music healed hearts and inspired hope. But through it all, she never lost her humility. Every day she reminded her students that music wasn't about fame or applause. It was about connection. It was about telling the truth when words failed. One afternoon, as she sat at the piano surrounded by her students, she looked out the window and saw the man standing outside, talking with some parents. He caught her eye and smiled. She smiled back. In that simple exchange, there was gratitude, friendship, and mutual respect. The kind of bond built not on wealth or power, but on shared humanity. As the day ended, she stayed behind after everyone had left. She sat down once more at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She played the same song she had played that night in the diner, the song that had started it all. But this time it sounded different, fuller, stronger, alive. When the last note faded, she closed her eyes and whispered softly to herself, "Thank you." Her daughter peeked in from the door, smiling. "Mama, are you ready to go?" The woman turned, smiling warmly. "Yes, sweetheart." "Let's go home." They walked out together, hand in hand, as the soft evening light poured through the windows. The piano sat quietly behind them, waiting for the next story, the next heart to heal. And somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning of a new symphony, written not with wealth or fame, but with kindness, courage, and the simple power of music to change the world.